Hollywood stars trusted their doctors with their bodies, careers, and lives, music, and some paid the ultimate price. Studio doctors pumped Wallace Reid with morphine and sent him back to work. 3 years later, he was 60 pounds lighter and dying in a sanitarium. Connie Francis went in to fix one operation and came out with the voice that made her famous nearly erased. Andy Warhol survived the surgery, then died while the hospital failed to notice his body shutting down. Robert Walker. Robert Walker had just starred in Strangers on a Train when his psychiatrist gave him a fatal sedative injection. According to friend Jim Hanahan's account, on August 28, 1951, Dr. Music, Frederick Hacker was at Walker's Brentwood home during an emotional episode. Hacker and Dr. Sidney Silver decided he needed sodium amytal to sleep. Walker refused, ran outside into the rain, then handed Hacker his glasses, and joked that the doctors were not big enough to make him submit. Hanahan carried him into the bedroom and held him down as the doctors searched for a vein. Walker laughed, "You can't even find the vein." Seconds after the injection, he lost consciousness. Music, Hacker and Silver began artificial respiration and injected caffeine and a heart stimulant. Hengen drove 10 miles in nearly 10 minutes through heavy rain to fetch internist Dr. Myron Princemetal. Princemetal examined Walker, conferred with the doctors in the bathroom and said, "The man is dead." Walker was 32. Hanahan returned to the bedroom, closed Walker's eyes, smoothed his hair, and covered his face. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe's doctors treated her insomnia with a supply of sedatives that became lethal. Psychiatrist Ralph Greenson and physician Hyman Angelberg treated Monroe simultaneously while she relied heavily on barbiturates and other sedatives. Angelberg prescribed Nembutal only 2 or 3 days before her death, instructing her to take 1 capsule nightly. An empty Nembutal bottle was found among roughly 15 medicine containers beside her bed. Chloral hydrate, another powerful sedative, was also in her system, music, and the combination with Nembutal sharply increased the risk of respiratory collapse. On August 4, 1962, music, Greenson visited Monroe at her Brentwood home and told housekeeper Eunice Murray to remain overnight. Around 3:25 a.m., Murray saw a light beneath the locked bedroom door, but received no answer. Greenson, music, arrived, broke through a window with a fireplace poker, and found Monroe on the bed with a telephone in her hand. Toxicology recorded fatal concentrations of pentobarbital and chloral hydrate. At 4:25 a.m., Angelberg called police, music, and said, "Marilyn Monroe has died." Judy Garland. Judy Garland was still a teenager when MGM doctors prescribed pills to control her weight, energy, and sleep. MGM doctors used Benzedrine to keep her working, then Second and other barbiturates to force rest before the next call time. During Annie, Get Your Gun. Garland arrived late, missed shooting days, and, music, was fired in May 1949. MGM sent her to a Boston hospital where doctors weaned her from the medication and restored normal eating and sleep. Months later, preparing for summer stock, music, she returned to pills to lose weight. The absences and delays began again. On June 17, 1950, MGM suspended her from Royal Wedding after repeated failures to report. 2 days later, during a severe emotional crisis, Garland injured her neck with a piece of broken glass. The wound was not life-threatening, but she was placed under medical supervision. MGM ended her 15-year contract that September. On June 22, 1969, husband Mickey Deans found Garland behind a bolted bathroom door in their London home. Her blood contained the equivalent of 10 YL tablets. The coroner ruled incautious self-overdose and accidental death. Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol survived surgery for a gangrenous gallbladder, then died during a night of documented failures in post-operative care. On February 21, 1987, surgeon Bjorn Thoresen removed the badly infected organ and repaired a hernia. Warhol was awake afterward, walking, making telephone calls, and watching television. During the night, however, intravenous fluids continued while his output was not properly tracked. His estate alleged that fluid accumulated in his lungs and placed fatal pressure on his heart. New York State investigators found numerous serious deficiencies, music, no complete medical history on admission, conflicting records about a penicillin allergy, gaps in temperature and pulse readings despite orders for checks every 4 hours, and inadequate evaluation of Warhol's private nurse. At about 4:30 a.m., Nurse Mcho noticed that he had become unusually pale. The cardiac arrest team was not called until 5:45 when he was unresponsive. The estate sued New York Hospital and 11 doctors and nurses. In 1991, the hospital settled the malpractice and wrongful death case for $8 million without Music admitting wrongdoing. Hank Williams. Hank Williams' final decline accelerated under Horace Toby Marshall, a convicted forger who posed as his personal doctor. Marshall had bought a fraudulent medical diploma and prescribed drugs under the alias Dr. C.W. Lemon. He supplied Williams with amphetamines, Channel, morphine, and chloral hydrate, claiming the powerful sedative could help control his drinking. Instead, Williams mixed it with alcohol while suffering from chronic back pain and worsening heart trouble. His performances became unreliable. His band, Music, left and the Grand Ole Opry dismissed him in August 1952. On his final trip, Williams reached Knoxville's Andrew Johnson Hotel, barely able to continue. Dr. P.H. Cardwell was called and gave him 2 vitamin B12 injections containing morphine, then allowed him to resume the overnight drive to Canton. Hotel porters placed him in a wheelchair, carried him to his Cadillac, arranged him across the back seat, and covered him with a blanket and overcoat. Near Oak Hill, driver Charles Carr noticed the blanket had slipped, reached back to replace it, and found Williams's hand stiff and cold. Jennifer Grey. Jennifer Grey's career was derailed after 2 rhinoplasties left the Dirty Dancing star almost unrecognizable. Grey had resisted surgery for years, but casting pressure and repeated warnings that her nose limited her roles finally wore her down. After discussing it with her mother and consulting 3 plastic surgeons, she agreed to a procedure meant to Music fine-tune her appearance. The first operation created an irregularity, forcing a second correction. That surgery went far beyond what Grey expected, leaving her nose shorter and dramatically different. The result was not a subtle improvement, but the loss of the face audiences knew. Music, Grey said photographers stopped recognizing her and casting opportunities dried up. Music, even people who had known her for years failed to identify her. At an airline counter, an employee accused Grey of Music pretending to be the actress from Dirty Dancing. At her first public appearance after the second operation, Michael Douglas, Music, looked directly at her and did not know who she was. Grey later summarized the damage in one sentence. Music, I went into the operating room a celebrity and came out anonymous. Tammy, Music, Wynette. Tammy Wynette's addiction began after doctors repeatedly treated surgical complications with Valium, Demerol, and Music injectable painkillers. A 1970 hysterectomy caused infection, scar tissue, intestinal blockages, and years of abdominal pain. Music, each operation brought new prescriptions. Wynette began taking Demerol even when she was not in pain, then switched to Music injections when pills no longer stopped withdrawal. One doctor trained members of her road crew to administer the drug. When physicians cut her off, she visited hospitals and doctors, Music, in different cities, sometimes scheduling overnight tour stops near emergency rooms to obtain more medication. In November 1986, Wetken led the rest of her appearances and entered the Betty Ford Center. 3 weeks into treatment, an intestinal blockage required an 8-hour operation that removed about a quarter of her stomach. Doctors placed her back on the same painkillers and the addiction returned almost immediately. By the 1990s, doctors had implanted a portacatheter in Wynette's chest so painkillers could be injected directly while she continued touring. Freddie Prinze. Freddie Prinze's doctors gave a severely depressed 22-year-old repeated access to CODs and, according to his family's lawsuit, returned the weapon used in his death. Internist Dr. Edward Albrin prescribed the powerful Music sedative despite Prinze's escalating drug problems. In November 1976, police arrested the actor for driving under the influence of COD. Psychiatrist Dr. William Kroger knew Prinze was unstable and had previously taken away his .32 caliber pistol. Yet the malpractice complaint alleged that he later gave it back. Prinze's Music wife filed for divorce weeks before the final crisis. During the early hours of January 28, 1977, Prinze telephoned relatives, friends, his arranged wife, and Kroger, warning that he could, Music, not continue. Business manager Marvin Snder rushed to his hotel apartment and arrived before Prince fired the pistol at himself. Music, he was taken to UCLA Medical Center, placed on life support, and died the next day. Music, without regaining consciousness. In 1981, Kroger agreed to pay the family $750,000. Albin paid another $200,000 to settle the malpractice claims. Peter Laurier. Peter Laurier's dependence began in 1925 when a second, music, surgeon treated complications from a ruptured appendix with morphine, pantopon, and other powerful opiates. The painkillers became a long-term habit as chronic gallbladder attacks kept giving him a medical reason to return to narcotics. By the time he reached Hollywood, the addiction was affecting his work. During Alfred Hitchcock's Secret Agent, the symptoms were visible on camera. While shooting the 8 Mr. Moto films between 1937 and 1939, colleagues reported finding Laurier in his dressing room with a doctor's syringe still in his arm. Repeated withdrawals for rehabilitation became an open secret around the studios. Laurier managed healthier periods at Warner Brothers, but he never fully escaped the cycle of pain, medication, and relapse. His weight eventually increased by about 100 pounds, reducing the sharp physical presence that had made him famous. In his final working years, he sometimes could not complete a take without stopping. He would leave the set for 10 minutes, music, steady himself enough to continue, then return and attempt the same scene again. Connie Francis. Connie Francis lost her singing voice after a New York doctor promised to repair damage from an earlier nasal operation. A 1967 cosmetic procedure had narrowed her nasal passages and, music, made singing difficult, especially in air-conditioned rooms. In 1977, another surgeon. 2 weeks before the operation, Francis was recording an Italian album. 2 weeks afterward, she returned to finish the overdubs and discovered that her voice was gone. Her range had collapsed to about 7 notes, too little to sing any song from beginning to end. The comeback she had planned stopped immediately. Francis underwent 3 more operations before she could sing again. For nearly 3 years, she remained unable to record normally and withdrew from regular performance while surgeons attempted to repair the damage. By 1980, she was finally recording again. But the voice that had carried dozens of hits now required rebuilding. Her 1981 single, I'm Me Again, became her last song to enter Billboard's adult contemporary chart, peaking, music, at number 40. Alma Rubin. Alma Rubin said her addiction began when a New York doctor gave her narcotics during an illness. Within months, she needed larger doses and was using morphine and heroin for real or imagined pain. Music. By 1926, colleagues described her glassy eyes and drifting speech on set, and Greta Garbo replaced her in the torrent. Music. Sanitariums became routine. In February 1929, Rubens tried to stab a physician who was taking her for treatment. A court sent her to the Spadra facility where she, music, escaped despite 4 nurses and 2 male guards. After another brief stay in Pasadena, her husband Ricardo Cortez and her mother had her committed to Patton State Hospital. Released in December 1929, Rubens announced a comeback and received 8 curtain calls at a Hollywood performance. In January 1931, federal agents arrested her in San Diego for cocaine possession and conspiracy to smuggle morphine from Mexico. She was freed on $5,000 bail, caught pneumonia, and slipped into a coma at Dr. Charles Flugger's home. After roughly 60 hours unconscious, she died there at 33. Robert, music, Cummings. Robert Cummings began seeing Dr. Max Jacobson in 1954 after friends Rosemary Clooney and José Fair recommended him for exhaustion. Jacobson told Cummings that his injections contained vitamins, sheep sperm, and monkey gonads. The injections actually contained heavy doses of methamphetamine, producing an immediate rush followed by a crash that drove Cummings back for another shot. Cummings kept returning, later obtained the mixture from Jacobson's son in Los Angeles, and eventually learned to inject himself. His personality swung between euphoric energy, music, and dark crashes. His work became erratic. Television roles declined, and friend Art Linkletter organized an intervention that failed. The drug use also entered Cummings's divorce proceedings. In 1969, his wife Mary accused him of regularly using methamphetamine, suffering wild mood swings, and allowing astrologers and numerologists to influence financial decisions. Their 24-year marriage ended in January 1970. The couple's community property was valued at $700,000 to $800,000. Jacobson was charged with fraud and unprofessional conduct in 1973 and New Music, York revoked his medical license in 1975. Gilda Renner. Gilda Renner spent 10 months seeking medical help while doctors misread or dismissed the symptoms of ovarian cancer. In 1985, while filming Haunted Honeymoon, she developed severe fatigue and pain in her upper legs. The symptoms continued as she consulted physicians in Los Angeles. One internist suspected Epstein-Barr virus. A gastroenterologist suggested her problems might be emotional. Gene Wilder said several doctors dismissed her as nervous and high-rung while none took a complete family history that would have revealed ovarian cancer in her grandmother, aunt, and cousin. A CA-25 blood test was not ordered until 10 months after her first complaints. On October 21, 1986, doctors finally diagnosed ovarian cancer. Renner cried, then told Wilder, "Thank God, finally someone believes me." A physician privately warned him that she had little chance. Surgeons operated 36 hours later and removed everything visible, including a grapefruit-sized tumor. The cancer had already spread beyond the ovaries and was classified as stage 4. Renner died on May 20, 1989 at 42. Edith Piaf's morphine addiction began in August 1951 after a car crash left her injured and doctors treated her pain with injections. She spent 5 days in hospital, then returned to work before fully recovering. By 1952, she was dependent on morphine, taking cortisone for rheumatism and sleeping pills for exhaustion. 2 further crashes brought more pain and more narcotics. Her husband, Jacques Pills, discovered her injecting morphine, music, and took her through 3 detoxification clinics. The first treatment in 1953 failed. That same year, she was heckled at the Casino de Roya after appearing drunk on stage. Music, in Las Vegas in 1955, the Riviera Casino paid out her contract, but refused to let her perform. Her condition increasingly interrupted her work. On December 13, 1959, during a punishing French tour, Piaf collapsed immediately after her final show in Dreux and underwent operations for ulcers and digestive bleeding. Music, she returned for the 1962 Olympia concerts in a weakened state with a doctor stationed in the wings throughout the performance. Wallace Reid. Wallace Reid was injured in a 1919 train wreck while filming The Valley of the Giants, leaving a 3-inch scalp wound that required 6 stitches. Instead of stopping production, studio doctors gave him morphine for the pain and sent him back to work. Paramount kept Reid on an assembly line schedule, sometimes allowing only a few days between pictures. As tolerance grew, so did his dependence. He completed film after film while losing weight, strength, and control of his body. By October 1922, on the first day of Nobody's Money, assistant director Henry Hathaway watched him stagger toward a chair, sink to the floor, and begin crying. Crew members lifted him into the chair, but he collapsed again and was taken away by ambulance. Paramount replaced him and destroyed the footage he had completed. Reid entered a sanitarium in December, weighing under 130 pounds, down from 190. He was so weak that lifting music his head could make him faint. Pneumonia and kidney complications followed during withdrawal. On January 18, 1923, he died there at 31 with his wife Dorothy beside. Hollywood stars trusted their doctors with their bodies, careers, and lives, music, and some paid the ultimate price. Studio doctors pumped Wallace Reid with morphine and sent him back to work. 3 years later, he was 60 pounds lighter and dying in a sanitarium. Connie Francis went in to fix one operation and came out with the voice that made her famous nearly erased. Andy Warhol survived the surgery, then died while the hospital failed to notice his body shutting down. Robert Walker. Robert Walker had just starred in Strangers on a Train when his psychiatrist gave him a fatal sedative injection. According to friend Jim Hanahan's account, on August 28, 1951, Dr.